Hello today. We are really excited to be able to begin our workshop today on how to identify and respond to government contract opportunities. However, before we get started, we wanted to introduce you to Adam Powers, who is a really talented individual who's running a very exciting program through Washington State's Department of Transportation, Office of Equal Opportunity. And so I'd like to give him an opportunity to share about this wonderful program and how it can be a resource to the businesses like yourselves. Please, Adam.
Well, thank you, Dan. As Dan has introduced me, my name is Adam Powers, and I work here at Tabor 100, where we're filming this. And Tabor 100 is an organization who's focused on helping BIPOC businesses, really in the Pacific Northwest, land some of these contracts, specifically some government contracts and just business contracts and construction contracts. Very specifically, what we're providing is technical assistance to those businesses, and we just recently landed a project with WashDOT, specifically around highway construction projects, as well as highway consulting and consulting around those highway projects. Where it's a technical assistance program where we're seeking BIPOC businesses who are looking to enter into that market. We're seeking to help you with some RFP, requests for proposals and bidding and bonding. We have a whole bunch of aspects under this technical assistance that we would love to provide you. And we will be releasing a flyer very soon on our website, letting you know more about the opportunity, as well as following up with those who are interested, filling out our intake form. And that way we'll be able to provide and understand your very specific needs and how we can best service you. So that's a little bit about Tabor, a little bit about the opportunity. And myself, I'm just a community member here. I'm a program manager at Tabor 100, and I've been really focused on implementing this technical assistance for individuals who are seeking it. So thank you for the opportunity and this introduction. That's who I am.
All right. Well, again, we're really grateful that you're able to join us to talk about identifying and responding to government contract opportunities. We're joined with our panelists today, and I couldn't be more excited to have the really talented, experienced individuals that we have with us today. Our agenda will go over the introductions, as I'm doing presently. Then we're going to go over our class objectives and get into questions and next steps and closing. And so everyone knows our objectives today really are to help empower the small firms to identify policies and practices that could be helpful for the firm to be aware of and the business owners to be aware of, as well as those areas that could cause them challenges. We want to be able to clarify the labor costs, the indirect and direct costs that go into your project overall cost, and also the implications of contract labor agreements that are often on some of these government projects. We also want you to understand the general contractor and owner requirements, as well as the preferred project conditions while working with them. Effectively promoting your business using really eye-catching materials and collateral that bring attention to the strengths of your business and your team. And finally, leveraging physical samples and actual evidence of your work to demonstrate the quality and durability of your line. Our panelist that will be sharing today is Vicki Schiantarelli. and she is with Schiantarelli and Associates and has been a strong community leader. She's also has held positions within government, and so she's able to apply those best practices to the small businesses. And as a small business, she's done an excellent job of both empowering our small businesses as well as educating her larger business clients on effective ways to reach out to us. Mayor Jimmy Matta is just a fan favorite of ours. He's a longtime member of the Institute and has been very active in the community, advocating for opportunities, capacity building, and also relationships with labor. He has been an advocate for the opportunities and resources that trade unions provide communities, and he's provided a lot of education for our small firms that don't have a lot of experience with organized labor and the best way to have that complementary relationship with labor. And finally, we have Rose Mednick with, and by the way, Mayor Jimmy is with AHORA Construction. I got to make sure I give recognition to his corporation that's doing fabulous, one of the fastest growing Hispanic-owned businesses in the state of Washington and probably the country. And Rose Mednick is an expert around branding and signage and positioning your firm to really get the kind of attention and exposure that you desire when you're working with folks or never had an opportunity to work with someone and you're passing that business card or that capability statement and you really want to impress someone. She's the one to really provide some insight around that. Not with us today is James Faison with Faison Construction, also a very active community leader, as well as Nathaniel Hartley with Hartley Creations. Faison Construction, they specialize in concrete, mostly flat work, and Nathaniel Hartley does plaster work and has some very exclusive products and lines that I think you will all be impressed by. Okay, well, now we get to our panelists and why we're all here today. Many of our small firms don't have the resources that it takes to respond to opportunities. So we decided that we wanted to put a class together with some very experienced business people to tell us some of the best practices around identifying opportunities and some of those areas that could cause challenges or impact your profitability if you don't pay close attention. So with no further ado, please welcome Vicki Schiantarelli.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. So I've been asked to talk about a few things, and so I'm going to start with the topic of owner conditions and requirements. And this is actually something that you, if you're interested in pursuing government work, getting to know what the government agency wants or expects of all of their contractors and consultants. So what you want to make sure that you're doing is, if you're pursuing work, say, for example, with the City of Seattle, is to understand the City of Seattle standards and conditions for design and construction work. If it's Washington State Department of Transportation, you'll want to look at their standard specs as well. So the purpose of that is to become familiar so that when they make a reference in the paperwork that you're looking at, you know what they're actually referring to, and you're not assuming that one government agency does things exactly the same way as another. Each one has its own requirements, in part either because of the laws that govern them, or in some cases, their funding requirements. So things to look for is also taking into consideration funding source. Is this a federally funded project, such as from the U.S. Department of Transportation or environmental protection agency? Or is this a state or local funded project, so you're only dealing with the amount of money that was deemed appropriate by, say, a city council or a county council? These things are very important because it's going to affect the kinds of materials and restrictions and limits that you're going to have for your project. Does it have a clause about Buy America, for example? Because that's going to tell you where some of your materials have to come from. And if you don't meet those requirements, there could be penalties associated with that. So it's really important to get familiar with the funding source in your government agency you want to target for business. And then make sure you read that in advance, even before you get to your pre-bid conference or pre-solicitation conference. If you haven't read those before you've gone there, you're already behind the 8 curve. So consider this some good bedtime reading as you want to pursue these projects. The other thing I want to talk about too then is the impact of the costs that you consider and probably don't think about once you get, such as your insurance and bonding. So for professionals, we have to get general insurance, and then we also have to have professional errors and omissions liability insurance. So we're carrying 2 policies. And for our construction folks, in addition to the insurance that they have to carry, they also have to look at bonding capacity. And so what you want to make sure you're doing is, if you're pursuing work, that the price of what you have to spend, especially if you have to increase your levels of insurance or bonding, doesn't outweigh or take away from your ability to be profitable on the project. Now, that isn't about just how much you're going to get paid. What I'm really talking about is being able to cover all of your direct labor costs, all of your routine overhead, which insurance and bonding would be part of, any special project overhead, because sometimes those are add-ons, and always make sure that you have a profit fee associated with all of that. It's your profit fee that determines whether you're profitable on the project, not whether or not you got your costs covered. If you're not making your profit fee on that, then you could potentially lose money on that particular project. Now, that means if you have too many of those projects that you're going to look like you're going to lose money, you're going to end up in the negative at the end of that cycle, not in the positive. And you may be better off skipping a project or reconsidering what you're going to pursue on that project, just so that you're still around for the next rainy day. So consider your profit fee, your rainy day money, for lean times and other purposes of growth, but make sure that you're able to factor that into that particular project. The other thing that I wanted to check in with you also is payment process and billing requirements. Payment is very, very important to your cash flow, so it is critical that you understand all your terms and conditions of payment. Don't assume that because you're a minority or woman business enterprise or a disadvantaged business enterprise, you're automatically going to get favorable payment conditions. A lot of times, the folks that you're interacting with, the estimators and the project manager on the project, don't even look at the contract that you get. It's going to be a contracts person or a fiscal person that sends you a contract, and they're operating on automatic pilot. So if they pay 30 days or paid when get paid, you're probably going to see those same terms and conditions in there. So it's very, very important early on when you begin to have these discussions what the payment and invoicing is going to be like. And there's a couple things we need to keep aware of. The cycles. So understand when the prime is going to get paid, understand when you would get paid, count those days on a schedule, on a calendar, because that's going to really tell you half of the cycle. Because remember, you're going to take your invoice, you're going to have to fill out an invoice in the way that you've been instructed to, and you got to cross your T's and dot your I's and attach any other documentation required in your terms and conditions. Send it to that prime, okay? Now that prime has to collect it from their other subs as well, take that, put it all together, and then send it to the owner. And then the owner is going to process it. And the owners don't process it when they receive it. They have their own schedule of when they process the paperwork. So it could be processed weeks later and then sent to the accounts payable folks to then turn around and cut those checks. So you're now talking about a considerable amount of time. So it's real important that if you don't want to have any worries about cash flow, to ask about any prompt pay terms and conditions, or maybe asking to get paid every 2 weeks rather than the standard. Now, if you can afford to do the standard, that's great. But if you do need to have more rapid payment, make sure that you have a clear understanding and an ask of that. And also understand, what does that mean? It doesn't mean necessarily you're going to get paid every 2 weeks. It may mean that once you've sent your invoice and it's been approved by the owner, you might get paid within 2 weeks. So pay attention to the language of what that means, because they're required to define what they mean by your payments. And then again, always plot it out on the calendar so you know exactly what to expect and not have any surprises. Then the other topic I wanted to cover briefly was material lead times and your submittal. So it is really critical to understand not only what the materials are that you're going to bring to a project, it's also important to understand the industry that supplies and manufactures your materials. As part of your estimating, you need to know how much time you need in order to order your supplies. So if you're looking to get lumber, and a particular kind of lumber, how much lead time do you need in order for it to arrive on a project? The worst thing that can possibly happen is you order the product and there's a month, 3 months, 6 months delay to get the product on the site. You're in a critical schedule, and now you've held up the project all by yourself. Not a good plan and not a good look. So understand clearly how much time you need to order the material. And then if ordering the material with a lot of lag time, what do you do with staging that material? Where are you going to store it? Who's going to store it? And what are the costs associated with storing that material? If you're lucky enough to have a site where you can store the material on site, don't forget to factor in the cost of transporting that material to the job site when it's needed and being able to schedule that. So when we talk about material lead times, it's not just about ordering the material, it's the whole logistics of getting the material manufactured and processed, and then ultimately ending on the site and plotting out each stage of what happens with your material, and then factoring the costs, and then also factoring, if you have to order it sooner versus later, how the market, because it's a little volatile right now, how that's going to impact your pricing. Make sure that those things are covered, or you potentially could be losing your profit fee because of a miscalculation in your material lead time. And then the last thing that I want to touch base on as far as some tips are looking at contract requirements in modifications or change orders or different terms and conditions that pop up. So one of the things is, if you have a contract and it doesn't talk about changes that could possibly happen on the project, do not sign that contract until you ask to have language put in there. Because if you are in a situation where you're asked to do a change order, you need to make sure you're protected in your contract and following the process in how to do a change order. Change orders are the biggest challenge to a small woman or minority or disadvantaged owned business, because those change orders, a lot of times the owner and the prime want the work done They're not going to sit there and do all this paperwork, and somehow at some point in time it's all supposed to be okay and to get paid. And there are sometimes change orders that get put off for payment, not only for weeks or days, but in cases months. And that could be a significant amount of the money that you're supposed to get paid, and now it's causing problems with your cash flow. So make sure that you have change order language or modification to the documents, and that you have time in order to adjust or make some changes on that in a way that doesn't penalize you. And this may be a place where if you didn't have special terms and conditions for payment, this is where you ask for that in order to maintain your cash flow. In the case where you're in an alternative public works, you're going to see documents that come out about what the scope looks like. But as you move through that kind of project, this is a case where you're on the contract while they're still designing. And then because there's some design changes, it totally changes maybe the scope or the amount of work that you're going to perform. What you want to make sure is that you're looking at the language in there about what those impacts are on you, and if you have a way of recovering, especially if you've invested some expenses and costs in order to get on the project in the first place. So this is where it's real important to have a conversation with the inclusion manager and the project manager, and being kept in the loop as the project moves forward so that you don't end up with a surprise. And so for that particular thing, I think I'll stop here and pass it on to Jimmy.
You know, one of the things that's important to figure out how labor unions work. You know, I am a union contractor. I'm signatory to the painters and allied trades and the carpenters. So I'm signatory to 2 unions. So I don't have to be on a PLA or a CWA to be union because I'm already union. And so my people that work for me are either apprentices or journeymen. And so those individuals are already indentured in the apprenticeship program. Now, if I'm on a PLA or a workforce contract, it's really important to know, okay, what does that really mean? And so it used to be that you would have a whole bunch of different kinds of CWAs and PLAs, which really it means that the union has sat down with the owner, the end user, to say, hey, we're going to work it out with the union so there is no strikes. So there's no strikes or pickets that occur on jobs where there's a CWA or a PLA. Now, most people would say that's great, but I think you got to understand that the PLA is one document, and the PLA refers back to the collective bargaining agreement of each particular union. So in the union movement, you have carpenters, you have iron workers, you have laborers, you have painters, you have electricians, you have plumbers, you have sheet metal. And within the unions, they're protecting the workers. It's a worker movement to protect the jurisdiction of the work. So you wouldn't want a sheet metal doing carpentry work or carpentry work doing sheet metal. So what ends up happening is the unions have come up with a solution to make sure they're working internally with themselves and then making sure that the client is not going to have any problems with strikes or pickets. Now, some of the things that you need to be aware of is that in the collective bargaining agreements, there's language sometimes that says if you're going to work at night, you're going to be paid for 7, you're going to be paid for 8, work 7. Or you got to have lunch at a particular time, or breaks at a particular time. Workers after 8 hours have to be paid overtime. When you're not under a collective bargaining agreement or under a PLA, you know, the state law says that it's after 40 that you have to pay overtime, but not when it's PLA or CWA jobs. On top of that, there's a percentage of apprentices that you have to have per every journeyman. And so what's important is to make sure that you not only ask for copies of it, but that you read it. You know, as the owner of a company, I think this is where it ends up having, you know, a lot of people say, well, why don't you read your contract, or why don't you read these documents? Well, I got to say that there's a lot of documents to read, and sometimes the wording you may not understand. But look, this is a very important document because not only are you signing that project labor agreement, but you got to sign the contract with the owner. And so what ends up happening is you end up going to what they call a meeting where all the unions are at, and it's set into jurisdiction. And that's where, let's say you need carpenters and laborers, is what they call composite crews. So these are things, that words that you would never know, and you need to be able to ask. Now, I gotta tell you, I had the new contractor syndrome as well, where you're saying yes to everything, and it'll bite you. It bit me, and I can't say not to do it, because more than likely you're gonna do it. That's why you're an entrepreneur, that's why you're a business owner, because you go out there and you test the waters, and you don't know how deep they are until you end up falling in the hole. But one of the things is keep on swimming, keep on paddling. If not, it could bring you under. The other thing is knowing your finances. You know, everybody wants the $1 million job. I wanted the $1 million job. I can tell you that that's the scary one, because what you got to understand is that you got to buy tools. So if you're under a PLA, or you're under a CWA, or you're a signatory contractor, or you've signed a collective bargaining agreement, it says there that you will provide the power tools. What ends up happening is a company, when you're new, your startup costs you've already calculated. But when you're going to start a new job, let's say you start a $1 million job, what you end up having to do is you end up having to spend $30,000 in tools. But remember, it takes anywhere from 45 days to 60 days to be paid. So what ends up happening? You end up on the 15th of the month, you got to pay the trust payments. Because if you don't, then you get interest and attorney fees. And this is where you start getting into trouble, right? Because then you have to go borrow money. And if you don't have where you're going to go borrow that money, because remember, you got to pay your workers every week. You got to pay the trust fund on the 15th of the month, and you got to do certified payrolls, and you got to do the paperwork, make sure that the workforce agreement is being respected, which is majority of workers have to be a certain percentage minorities on the job. So that's what ends up happening when you end up, having those challenges. On top of that, when I talk to paperwork, you got to make sure that you have your safety paperwork in, and your site-specific plan, and you got to make sure you have your fall protection, and you got to make sure you have your hot work paperwork. So the number one thing I can say is communication. Look, you got to communicate with your staff, and we know, I know, you know, and everybody knows how hard it is to find qualified workforce at this moment. Not only at the administrative part in your office, but also in the field. Even though the unions have come out and said, we are going into this agreement with you to make sure that we're providing the workforce that's ready and available, trained to go to work. Well, that would be wonderful if we wouldn't have had the last several recessions where it's caused people not to go into the construction industry, and it's caused, a void in the industry. So it's always important to build a relationship with the union. Like, if you're going to sign an agreement with the union, it shouldn't be an adverse relationship. If the union's representative is having an adverse relationship with you, then go to the top. They got bosses as well. Sometimes businesses, they get upset with labor unions. But we always got to remember is that that's a workers' movement, and they have lobbyists, and they have their own money they're spending, and making sure that they're protecting the workers that are part of a union. And me as a business owner, and I am a card-carrying carpenter union member, I'm also a business owner, so I got to make sure that whatever I'm getting involved in, and whatever I'm doing, I got to make sure that the numbers make sense. So I got to make sure that I know how much it's going to cost me to start the job. I got to make sure I know what's gonna cost me every week, because remember, you got to payroll every week. And if you've passed that threshold, then you got to also pay your taxes every week. When you first start off, you're able to pay. You got a little longer to pay your taxes, but when the government sees you're starting to make money, then they want you to pay your taxes on a weekly basis. So you got to calculate that. On top of that, you got to calculate what is going to be your trust fund liability on the 15th of the month. So if benefits, so let's say the wages on somebody's check is 34, and plus benefits, maybe you're at 63, $20 of benefits. You got that money, you don't really have to pay it every week, but you got to have it ready to be paid on the 15th. And that's where you start getting into trouble, because if you're not watching your accounts, watching your how much money you're spending on material, it could be that when it turns the 20th of the month and you're ready to bill, you don't even have enough money to bill to cover what you've already done. So it's really important to always keep your schedule, keep in line, okay, here's how many workers I'm gonna have. And for you business owners, look, numbers don't lie. Numbers do not lie. When you're putting that bid together, you should know how many lineal feet per hour your workforce can do, right? You should know how many square feet your workforce can do an hour. And so you should already know how many people you're gonna need, because you should already know how long it's supposed to be taking you on that schedule with that job. So remember, communication is key. People that end up being too proud or really don't know when to ask for help, that's when you start getting into trouble. I've worked with a lot of project managers, just great project managers, and I've worked with some project managers that are gonna try to bury you. So never do work when you're gonna be doing change orders, never do work without it being approved. Because look, I can guarantee you our memory does not work when it's been 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, 1 month, 2 months. I've had a job where I ended up having to do 125 extra work orders, and so they need to be tracked, and you need to have a tracking system in your office. So these are some tips that, if you find yourself in trouble, there's already, like, I got forms, Mr. Seydel has forms, Vicki, she's been great, Vicki Schiantarelli, with our business. Because the other part of this, when I talk about communication, is making sure your team's on the same page, and I usually have a yearly meeting with all my staff to set the goals. For instance, we were just going through our goal setting, and I remember when I said, our dream is to have an office. Our dream is to have 2 trucks. Our dream is to, make sure that we have a shop. And looking back, we have our new office, we have our shop, we have computers. And this has been over the period of 5 years, and it's took me some time to learn how to manage my business. I think the biggest part when you open up your business and you're a new contractor or a new business, it's that you generally say, I'm going to be the best employer that anybody can work with or for. But what you find along the way is that there's a difference between being a friend with your employees, and there's a difference with being the boss at the office. Because at the end of the day, here's what it is, y'all. And this is what I tell my team. We're a team here. Like, everybody that ends up staying with me, because people can leave, go get a job somewhere else. It doesn't, the problem that in their mind was big is no longer their problem. But the people that are with you, people that are there steady with you, you got to make sure that not only are you building their leadership qualities, teaching them where to read, where to capture the information, but more than anything, making sure that you're keeping with the wages in the industry. Because look, you spend all this money training your people, and if the boat doesn't rise together, then what ends up happening is you end up spending so much money in training, you end up losing people. I also want to talk about communication expectations from the people in the field. We're human beings. There's nights where you stay up until 1 o'clock because you have problems at home, and the crews are tired. But you gotta remember is that you gotta make sure that you're meeting expectations. There's some schedule requirements that you have to meet, or you're gonna be in trouble. There's some quality that you got to make sure that is being met. And so as an owner, it's always important for you to be out in the field, take a look at it, and then make sure that you have your second person and your third person and your fourth person, because that's what we call in my company nurturing leadership. Because when I hire people, I'm not saying, hey, I don't need a carpenter or an apprentice, I need a leader. And so when you open up your business, then you get to choose where you're going to invest your money, your time, your effort. And I'm so happy that the Platinum Group here has put this training together, because when I started, sometimes it was embarrassing to ask questions, or it was embarrassing to ask for the 2-week payments, or it was embarrassing to say that I haven't paid my suppliers because I'm 30 days late. Because remember, even though it says 30 days you're going to be paid, okay, it doesn't necessarily mean 30 days. So remember that the 15th of the month, generally when you pay your rent, you get about 5 days grace period. When you're going to pay your trust funds, you got until the 15th. So for instance, my office, I've always said, make sure that payment's there on the 15th. Well, they sent it out to the trust fund, the Carpenter's Trust Fund, on the 15th, and it was considered late because the check didn't get there on the 16th. So then I ended up having to pay a penalty of $10. Imagine if it would have been longer. At least it was only several hours, $10. So you got to remember, in the collective bargaining agreement, it states when you sign what rights you're signing away from your company. So it's always good to know that. And I got to tell you, I know how hard it is. You're estimating, you're project managing, the trucks broke down, somebody's calling you here, somebody's calling you there. You look at your workflow, you have empty in February, you have empty in March. Don't go through what I went through. And one of the experiences that I went through is spikes. So I would spike really hard in June, July, August, then I would spike down really hard, and I'd spike up. So I've had enough of that. What I've said is, hey, look, we're going to project what does it look like for the 12 months, and more than anything, knowing what is it that you have the capacity to do. Like, for instance, I thought I had the capacity to do $1 million job. Yes, we got through it. Yes, we're going to probably win a prize on it, but it cost us a lot of money. And so I had to go back and do an analysis. Why did it cost us money? Well, didn't have enough leadership there in the field, didn't have another PE or a PE just dedicated because of the amount of paperwork that you have to fill out. So we started looking at those things and started saying, and how does that really help us? When we set up the $1 million job, every time that we're billing, they're keeping 10% and plus 5% at the end. So if you look at a job that goes bad, you're gonna end up in trouble without being able to have that money. So you gotta always look. I've done it, I went out there and things have gone great, but I've done some things where, my God, like I have to figure out where am I gonna find this money? And as most people of color in the United States of America, when it comes to credit, we really don't have very good credit. So we're gonna get that money at 9 to 11% interest. So you always gotta remember, or you gotta have sisters, or you gotta have a friend that's gonna loan you this money so you're able to pay it off. Because imagine if you're paying 9 to 11% interest on a loan, and you're only gonna be able to mark it up when it comes to public work, 10% overhead, 5% profit. Okay, that's all you can charge. So if you're having to pay 11% for borrowing the money, I mean, how far are you really gonna get ahead? So to me, I've learned my lesson, because a lot of people say don't grow fast, but you don't know what growing fast is until you're in the middle of it. And 2021, 2020, probably 2021 was probably the biggest challenge that we had, because we couldn't find the workforce. And especially now in these days with the pandemic that we just went through, a worldwide pandemic, okay? It closed down the production lines. So most of the stuff that we were able to get right away wasn't coming in. We had to, stagger work because you couldn't get the doors. So we ended up having to figure out how do we have a plan in place to make sure that the job still gets done. I'm in good grace with the general, where we're not, having that adverse relationship. But even at that, sometimes it ends up happening, right? And then also choosing your clients, very important. I always thought that every client would be a good client. And it's just because, it's just the way you service them. But in reality, there's going to be those clients that are in there for profits. They're in there, they don't really care who they run over. They got to run you over, they're going to run you over. Then you have those other companies that understand corporate responsibility. And those are the ones we want to look for. The ones that understand what's happening in America when it comes to procurement opportunities, when it comes to credit, when it comes to goals that are set on publicly funded jobs. Because at the end of the day, unions, business owners, community members, Black, white, Latinos, Asians, we all pay our taxes in America, so we should all be able to benefit from tax dollars. And so with me, it's just a joy seeing my company grow, seeing my son, growing in the company, and some of the other staff have a lot of millennials. But that's also, part of your communication is, what are you trying to do with your business? Look, we know that we have baby boomers going out the door in mass numbers, which is a detriment to the industry. But we also know that we have, my generation, we're called the money generation, the X generation, but we're starting to get some salt and pepper in our hair, and so a lot of the baby boomers want to work with us. And then we have the millennials and the Z generation. There are almost 87 million of those young people. Those are really the future, and so I've decided to invest that money in my people who, are young adults, which if you see them today, you would never know if you put them side by side with somebody that has experience. But it took time to lose money in some instances. It takes time to sit down and educate them and inform them of collective bargaining agreements, of PLAs, of apprenticeship standards in the state, of Department of Labor rules, of MLRDA, of the AGC, who are the partners in the industry. Make sure you read their bylaws. And then more than anything, there's this book called Never Eat Alone. And that book just tells you that you gotta know who's successful out there and build those relationships, have lunch with them, never eat alone. Always have a lunch meeting where you're gonna be able to learn and expand your abilities. For instance, with me, there's been times where I picked up the phone and asked Dan Seydel, hey man, you've been around in the industry for a while, I got some questions on you. And sometimes it's just as simple as saying, don't worry about it. That's just a bluff. They're trying to scare you. Or Vicki, where I wanted her to bring in and do an analysis of our business plan, because everybody says, well, just do a business plan. It shouldn't be creative writing. A business plan should really be the future of your business. Here's where we'd like to be in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. And where we're aiming for is making sure that we have a consistent, slow growth, and making sure that we have all the time in the world, and we got to do it right. Because what ends up happening if you get the wrong clients, the wrong partners, and you don't read, you'll end up in a jam, you'll end up in lawsuits, and you end up flat broke and without a business. In business in America, we live in a capitalist society, and in capitalism, it becomes very difficult in this era when it comes to money, because we have a gap in the financial institutions loaning money and borrowing money to some of our individuals in our communities across the country. So I'm very lucky, I'm part of the 2-3% of companies that become $1 million that are Latinos. We have 64 million Latinos in the United States of America, 34 million could vote, only half vote. We're $2.5 trillion of the GDP. On top of that, for the next 20 years, we have 1 million Latinos turning 18, 50% are dropping out of school. This is a national security issue. These are the leaders that we need to bring into the industry. We need to inform, educate, and grow our industry. And thank you very much, Dan, for the opportunity to speak to the audience.
So we have a question from the audience, and it was based on a comment I made earlier about labor costs, and elaborate more about what that really means. So when we're looking at the breakdown of our pricing, and this impacts all your industries, but let's focus on consulting and construction. So you're going to talk about direct labor costs, and these are basically folks' salaries. So if you pay a worker $30 an hour or $50 an hour or $100 an hour, and that's what shows up on their paycheck, that is going to be classified as direct labor costs. And then you have your overhead, and overhead is direct and indirect components. Your indirect labor costs, those are the things that we think about as far as benefits. So it's something going into a pension fund, is some money going to pay for health care, and other types of benefits, sometimes the value of a bus pass even. All of those kind of benefits that are associated with your workers are going to be your indirect labor costs. Sometimes it's going to be project specific, and sometimes it's going to be general. So when we talk about project specific, if you have a worker who's going to be exclusively assigned to a specific project, that is going to be a project specific overhead component. If you have administrative staff, so you have a front desk and you have an individual who sits at your front desk, answers the phones, does the mail, does some basic desk functions, that person's providing services across the board for everybody and all the projects. So that's going to be your indirect costs associated with that. With your direct labor, it's specific to the project, and your administrative folks, your executives, your account managers, and so on, are part of the behind the scenes. So anything that your prime or your owner is not going to pay for as a line item of staff is going to fall into your indirect labor costs or your overhead category. Your overhead also includes your rents, your utilities, the cost of your software and your equipment, your fuel, and all of these things that you buy to support your workers so they can be successful. Tools, for example, is going to be part of that overhead cost. And so that's probably the area of your expenses that's the most difficult for some people to consider, because if you don't have a good chart of accounts that has everything line itemized or categorized, it's real easy to leave it off the calculations, and that's where you end up losing money. So when we look at that, we want to do, and I always encourage people to do what we call a government chart of accounts. And a government chart of accounts is not what you typically get from some quick software from the bank or like QuickBooks. A government chart of accounts is actually a part of the regulations. And agencies, government agencies, will tell you what they allow and what they don't allow. So, for example, in your overhead, your charitable contributions that you make are not going to count in your overhead. You're going to have to back that out because government won't pay for that. Government won't pay for alcohol. So if you go and have a lunch meeting with somebody and you have a glass of wine or a beer, you can count the overhead, the lunch for your overhead, but that beer has to come off. So when you really need to understand what's allowed and not allowed when you're calculating overhead. So just because you have XYZ dollars spent in overhead doesn't mean you get to count all of it in your package. So when we talk about that overhead, you need to have it very detailed line item. I separate each software that I purchase separately. So my Microsoft 365 is a different line item from my Zoom account or any of the other different services like SurveyMonkey or whatever that I might have. And I do that on purpose because it allows me to have a good sense about what I'm working with and whether or not I need to upgrade software, for example, or upgrade some of my products that I'm using, or whether or not sometimes I might be able to use it as a line item overhead expense because it was acquired specifically only for a single project. So those are the kinds of things you're looking at. So summarizing that, because this can be complicated, your direct labor costs are the workers that are on your project, 100% on that project. Right. And any other workers you have that support them or support your business, they're going to be kept, their salaries and everything else that goes with it and their benefits are going to be part of your overhead costs. And then those direct labor folks that you've got working, their benefits are also part of the overhead. So when we talk about direct labor, it's very specific to the project. They're the ones doing the work to provide the deliverable, whatever that might be. Okay. Now, the Department of Transportation, WSDOT, Washington State Department of Transportation, has a program specifically for consultants called Safe Harbor. All right. So, as Jimmy had mentioned earlier, in a situation like a PLA or CWA, or you're signatory to the union, there are certain audits that you go through. The union will audit, make sure everything is compliant, you've done everything you're supposed to do. There's paperwork you turn into the prime, so there's kind of a a little audit thing going on there to make sure all the dollars and the hours and everything add up. And then there's some monitoring that the owner does in the construction side. In a consulting side, you could be audited or would be audited by either the Department of Transportation through the Safe Harbor program, or you pay, and it's expensive, independent third-party government certified public accountant to audit your books every year. Now, you could spend $5,000, $10,000, and for our larger consultants, they're spending like $50,000 a year to get their books audited every year. And you're expected to use things like QuickBooks or some type of program with it using the government chart of accounts. So for a small firm, that's a huge expense. And so what the purpose of Safe Harbor was to allow the Department of Transportation, through their auditor's division office, basically assign you an overhead rate. which is 110% of your direct labor. And so what they do is they have a formula that they use. You have your direct labor. So let's keep the dollars simple, okay? So we'll say you get paid, you're paying yourself or your worker $100 an hour, and the overhead is 110% of that. So it's 100, it's 1.1 times 100, and that's the overhead assignment to that worker. And then WashDOT might say, okay, you've got a 30% profit fee. So that 30% is that 0.3 times the $100 of direct labor. And then you add each three, direct labor plus the overhead plus the profit fee, and that's the hourly rate that you put down on the paper. And so there are two categories of rates that you would have per worker if you have different salaries. And that is 100% if you're in your own office because you're paying for rent, utilities, and all the other stuff, or 80% if you're out in the field because they're not going to pay for your office building if you're not in it. So if you're doing field work, you use the 80% overhead rate, and if you're in your office, the 100%, or 110%, I should say. So the safe harbor is really good for folks who are just starting until they get audited or are able to hire it. And it works really well in that case for corporations and for complex limited liability companies. If you're a sole proprietor or a what I call single shingle limited liability company, basically a sole proprietor who filed with the Secretary of State, that becomes a little bit more of a challenge because you're trying to work, but remember now, you're only getting paid by somebody else for your direct labor. So when you sit down and do your own invoicing, you're keeping your records that I spent an hour invoicing, but nobody paid me for that. So it becomes a challenge to basically have the backup documentation for the auditor's office for that hour bookkeeping that you did. So I recommend that if you're going to go the route of the safe harbor program and you're a sole proprietor or a limited liability company, that what you do is you get off the program as quickly as possible and build up your infrastructure of your bookkeeping early. And then keep your costs very, very low so you can take advantage of the fixed rate of 110%. And then as soon as you're able, get off of it or incorporate or turn yourself into a managed, controlled limited liability company rather than a member-controlled one. So you're not filing a Schedule C. And the reason for that is the way you get paid and how you must be paid changes depending on your business structure.
Sure.
So there are folks that never really get good at the bookkeeping stuff, so they're still in safe harbor. And the problem for those consultants is they're going to start to lose money over a period of time because that 110%, if you go through an audit and you ended up spending less, you're supposed to pay back that money back to WashDOT. You don't get to keep it and say, oh, goody for me, I did better. So it's real important to get in and get out of that program as soon as possible to do that. Now, there are other federally funded projects out there, such as the Environmental Protection Agency's version of the DBE program, the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program. They don't do audits. Their program is under a completely different federal register. And if you're a certified firm, you get, and as long as your rate, your full rate, is within what they consider market. So if an inclusion management consulting firm, let's say the average is anywhere between let's say 200 and 225. I'm making the numbers up, but just for argument's sake. And my rate is 210, then the EPA would say, oh, you're within the range. We're not going to worry about it. And you get to keep that rate. And it doesn't matter what my overhead is or isn't, or what my profit fee is or isn't. As long as I'm in that market rate and I'm a small firm, I get a pass. But there are specific federal government agencies that won't accept that or don't use that method. USDOT is one of them. And so the small firms are currently getting audited, just like the big ones are subjected to that criteria. So those are the kind of the pros and the cons of being in the safe harbor. For some folks, if you're in the safe harbor and you're single shingle, working out of your home, especially if you're not looking at a lot of people for staff, is advantageous if you don't pay rent.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And, listening to the logic that some of these systems and structures are developed under, maybe there's opportunities for us to continue dialogue with those government agencies and those electeds to make them aware, like in the case of not being in the office, but being in the field. My insurance doesn't stop because I stepped out of my office. My insurance is still what it is. And so it'd be wonderful if we could educate, some of these folks around their systems and policies. But again, this is why we had Vicki here, because she's so knowledgeable about what the various agencies are doing and what the federal government's true interest is, and then obviously being aware of those barriers of implementation and execution. Next on the presentation, we were going to go over understanding the general contractor and owner requirements, and I will go through this section as briefly as possible because most of it's redundant. Obviously, as what was mentioned earlier by Mayor Matta, was becoming, as well as Vicki, is becoming familiar with the owner's preferred parameters and conditions and requirements. What does the ideal contractor look like to them? Is there a certain process? Is there a certain expectations and systems that they follow that they look upon as advantageous for vendors? And there's some things that we can replicate in our business that give us those best practices of the larger firms that they tend to select more oftenly. You heard the importance of understanding when you're going to get paid, how you're going to get paid, what conditions and documentation is required for that. It's very critical that you're looking at the time that it takes to supervise the work and calculate the time as it relates to reporting. And a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that, as Vicki just stated, the time that it takes to produce that billing, that's not typically something that you get reimbursed for. And so it's important for you to be proactive and intentional as it relates to knowing your expenses and how that will impact the overall success of the project. We talk about confirming the project safety of your company training requirements and make sure they mesh well with the owner's requirements as well as the contractor if you're working under a contractor. Verifying that your personnel meets the minimum requirements, and sometimes, like in the project that we were looking at for David Benson earlier, who is one of our great firms and great individuals that we've had a lot of success with, and unfortunately I've already forgotten how to cast this. So we're going to cast this, but there we go. It was the wrong dot. And so here's an opportunity that David Benson, who's one of our firms, he's pursuing this contract, and you can see it's, in this case, it's for King County Housing Authority. They've identified the scope and as well as the forms that are required. And this is really important when you're putting a bid together. It's not just your bid, it's to be able to recognize that there's some other documentation that's going to be required for this project. And in this case, there are some specific requirements that could impact, his ability to be successful. And in this situation, I wanted to bring some attention. In this case, he's a HVAC contractor, so he does mechanical work. And if you see these areas that I've highlighted, they want to make sure that the work, the equipment, and the individuals that are working on the project can meet those requirements of the project and the expectations. And so they identify right here what type of certification they're expecting. In this case, it's a Type 2 technician. And they also want that to know that you've got their training from the manufacturer. And so these types of scenarios are things that you must be aware of when participating in these public contracts. You want to be aware of those in areas that would make you unable to compete at the level to compete with your competition and be considered a viable competitor. And so those are some areas that I wanted to make sure we touched bases on. And then obviously making sure that your company and the individuals within your company, and like in King County, there are strict requirements around COVID. And they want every one of your employees to, in fact, have been vaccinated. And so those are things that are real critical to make sure that you comply. The last couple sections of the class is really going to talk about marketing and those areas around promoting your business. And so we're going to talk with Adam Powers with Tabor 100 and talk about how effectively promoting your business using strong graphics, business cards, capability statements, websites, and social media can really give your business a professional look and give credibility to folks that don't know your business. Adam, please walk us through this area.
My name's Adam Powers. I work here at Tabor 100. I also have been working in the business world, just doing business consulting and helping businesses take their business from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0, and now we're working on taking businesses into Web 3.0. And that's just really helping those businesses tell their story, because that's what marketing is about. It's finding a way to express yourself and to share who you are and what your business is about, whether that's a business card that has your name and your logo on it and how people can contact you, whether that's a business website where they can find you in a digital space and learn about who you are, ways to contact you, and see some imagery about what your business has done. Or that could be a brochure, something that you hand or send to one of your prospective clients. These are all ways of marketing yourself. And as we tell stories about ourselves, on who we are, where we grew up, and things that we hold in our interest, we need to think about our businesses and telling the business story as well. So that website being an online presentation of who you are, so that your contractors and your bidders will go there and in determining whether you are a valuable candidate, they want to get to know you. They want to get to know your business story. And that's where the website comes in. And when you're in person, it's the same thing. You're going to be asked for your business card. So it's very important just that everybody who's starting out a business has those assets, that business card that you can hand to the prospective client with your name on it, with your logo, with your location, and best form of contact. the website, which they can go and find you and learn more about your company, and we can show some previous contact information and projects. But there's also that brochure or one sheet that a lot of times you'll have to share it with individuals. They like you, they got your business card, they want to know more about you, and they say send over information. So that's where we need to create these brochures. And these marketing techniques and tools are not something that every business owner knows how to do. It's not what you're focused on. You might be focused on construction, development, but that's okay. We still need to express ourselves, and there's multiple different tools of ways to create business cards and logos. There are websites like Fiverr or Upwork where you can connect with individuals digitally to find individuals who can create a business logo, who can help you create these one pages and these brochures. So don't feel like you need to be an expert at telling your story. You can always connect with an expert to help create those assets that can express who your business is, what you do, and how you do it. And social media is also, as we know, such a powerful tool in this age and can get you contracts by just you communicating what you do and the quality of your work. You can take pictures of a finished drywall, hashtag your name on that and post it, and it becomes a lead generation. Someone sees that, they're looking for drywall, and they connect with you. So again, it's very important for you to tell that business story and to give people avenues to find you, whether that's in person in a meeting, online through your website, those brochures. All of that helps to tell your story and helps express it. And that's really marketing on ways that we can help to access and give people access to us and know the qualities. And these are very important because when you're going for bids, these are a lot of the requirements will ask you for your website. So it is mandatory, and some of the reasons certain grantors and contractors disqualify individuals. Because this is the age we're in. We need a way to really understand who you are. And the paperwork only says so much. So these other avenues are ways for you to connect with those individuals when you yourself are not in the room. We already talked about business cards. We talked about websites. And we talked about social media being such avenues for expressing ourselves. Again, not everybody's skilled at that. Some of us are more skilled with our hands. Some of us are more skilled just by speaking. So I always highly recommend connecting with individuals like Rose from Image 360, who has businesses dedicated to helping you express your story and expressing it in a way that reflects authentically who you are and why your services and your business should be the one that individuals contact.
Thank you very much, Adam. And, to show value. And what Adam shares is really showing the client without necessarily using your words. Sometimes it may be printed in this case, but to effectively really promote your business and to also be able to share wins. When folks go to your website, they should be able to see some past projects, some awards and recognitions, some things that would make them feel empowered if they brought you on the team. Thank you so much, Adam, for elaborating on that area. And I would encourage you to take advantage of the support services contract because many of these services can actually be procured under that program, and many of you will find that these resources are free. All right, and our final section of our workshop today is really leveraging physical samples that demonstrate quality and durability. Now, Adam talked about actually using imagery, pictures and photos, and capturing those images on your physical marketing collateral. But some of you actually produce products, physical products. And in those cases, it's a good opportunity to actually have those around. Obviously, you're not going to carry a 4x12 sheet of sheetrock around. But if you, have a small sample of a 1x1 frame that, illustrates a special texturing or coating or some sort of application, it's nice to be able to have that physically available for someone to put their hands on and get a better idea on what will the maintenance be for this type of product? What will be required if, in fact, there's damage to the wall? Is it going to be something that I can easily repair and patch? And so those are things that are going to be important. And obviously, when you're producing samples, you want to recognize the designer's objectives. You want to make sure that your work really flows well with the designer's priorities. You want to also make sure that you're providing a high quality sample. So sometimes you may do a whole bunch of samples and choose the one that really is going to do the best, especially if you want to set them up for travel. Sometimes, samples can get damaged, so you may want to put a little more time on protecting the edges and sides or other pieces of your product. Be prepared to describe the benefits of your product and how it compares to other products that may be equal or less value, and how it impacts the life cycle of the building. And always leverage the opportunity to educate your customer on what it takes to actually produce this sample. There may be some elements that will illustrate that you put more time and care into the work that you're doing. And so it's really important to be able to leverage that great opportunity that you have with the face-to-face, to be able to give them something that they can put on their hand and look at and talk about. Finally, we've had, such a great panel of very talented individuals providing backgrounds on so many different things. I wanted to touch bases on a few things, and if Adam, you had anything that you wanted to add during this time, feel free to. But it was really an important thing to think about, and as I was driving here to this class, I saw an 18-wheeler, and it was carrying 4 tires. 4 tires, an 18-wheeler. Now you can imagine those tires must have been pretty big if all it had on was 4. And so no telling how big the equipment that those tires were on. It took up maybe about 4 feet on each side of the bed and the tires, and they had 2 stacked on top of each other. Well, if I have some equipment that's doing some excavation work and it's that size, maybe I'm just thinking about what it's going to take to get my equipment there. But maybe I'm not thinking about what happens if I run over something in the process of doing that work, and being able to have that equipment or have those spare tires. Or maybe it's something that I have to assemble. And so I can't put it all on one truck. I have to put it on multiple trucks. And so being able to calculate that, how is that going to impact my cost for the project, the profitability that I may have? Maybe I want to buy some equipment that's closer, to the site. Or maybe I want to rent, and so you want to really give consideration to the logistics of getting products, materials, equipment to and fro factory to the site. And so you really want to be thinking about that. And Mayor Matta, obviously, he's a unique individual and unique in as it relates to being able to achieve such high levels of leadership at a young age. But the importance of understanding the relationships that he mentioned in this case with the union and other stakeholders that impact your work, understanding the hierarchy, understanding the sequencing of the overall project, and then how your work kind of ties to it. And then he mentioned the transformational leadership, being able to pass the baton to someone younger and better looking like Adam. But some of the best practices we have, you can laugh, bro. You don't have to be so scared.
I'm trying to stay calm for the camera.
We want to apply lessons learned and best practices. There are so many. I don't want to go over each one of them. These were just a few. We want to actively communicate with the owner, the general contractor, to be sure that we understand their expectations and that we can exceed them. We want to prepare ourselves for that. We want to clearly communicate our understanding of the scope and conditions. We understand that this project is going to, require a lot of work, and we want them to understand that we understand each itemized activity that it takes to execute this project. We want to be able to demonstrate our past performance to give credibility and give them comfort that this firm is going to be able to execute. Why? Not only because they presented themselves well today, but here's a past project that is similar to ours. Make sure you're sharing your references, your recognitions and achievements. Don't make it difficult for them to identify your wins. Pat yourself in the back, because if you don't, who will? Follow up whenever you put time into putting one of these proposals and responses together. Follow up. Find some time to do a debrief. Find out if the format met their expectations, how your numbers compared to other numbers. Try to get them out of the office so it can be more personal. Maybe they can tell you a little more than they would be willing to tell you in their office. And make it clear the type of value that you can bring to their team. That was pretty much what I had from closing and best practices. Were there any other thoughts that you had as it relates to preparing these firms to be able to respond effectively and efficiently on these government opportunities?
Well, I would just really focus on just coming to Tabor and working directly with us, because that is our goal here, is really to help you cross some of those crucial barriers and hurdles around dealing with organizations like WashDOT and the technical barriers that you face. So I think you went over everything. I would just recommend, again, contacting myself, Adam, here at Tabor. My email is adam.powers, Powers, at tabor100.org, and we can help address some of the nuances and technical difficulties that you might face while trying to pursue a grant like this or programs and contracts like this.
Thank you, Adam, and I think that makes a whole lot of sense. There's a great resource in the Washington State Department of Transportation Office of Equal Opportunity. They're the ones that made it. They're the ones responsible for giving this class in front of you. And again, they have other programs within their organization. They have the great WMBE Technical Assistance Support Services. They have the Capacity Building Mentor Protege Program. And they actually are starting to work on other opportunities to be able to make the environment much more friendly for our small minority and women-owned businesses. Well, to me, this was action-packed, fully packed full of great information, and hopefully you will find it useful. Thank you again. If you need to reach me, again, I'm Dan Seydel. My email is dan@platinumbusinessgroup.com, 800 number 800-270-0724. And if you have any other questions about WashDOT and OEO, please reach out to Diane Gard. Thank you so much for being with us.